The band that I have, the team around me are just the best ever. They give you that sense of security.
Roger Waters once controlled everything in Pink Floyd. He decided what they played, how they looked, even who they could talk to. But the worst betrayal happened in secret courtrooms during the 1980s. Waters tried to legally destroy Pink Floyd and leave his bandmates financially ruined. He compared them to fake Beatles. He spied on their recording sessions. For years, Gilmour said nothing. But now he's revealed how Waters' obsession with power turned their brotherhood into a nightmare that haunts them still. David John Gilmour was born on March 6, 1946, in Grantchester Meadows, Cambridge, a village known for its close ties to the university. His father, Douglas, was a senior lecturer in zoology at Cambridge University, and his mother, Sylvia, worked as a teacher and film editor. Their home was only 2 miles from the historic spires of Cambridge, a world surrounded by academic brilliance. But David was never drawn to that world. By the age of 13, he had begun skipping classes to play guitar in local coffee shops. On his 14th birthday, he chose a $30 Spanish guitar instead of the textbooks his parents hoped for. School reports from 1960 described him as musically obsessed and academically negligent. By 1962, he was sneaking out of his bedroom window at night to jam in Cambridge folk clubs, returning home at 2 in the morning with sore fingers and parents who were losing patience. Before joining Pink Floyd, Gilmour had an unusual career that few fans know about. Between 1967 and 1969, he worked as a fashion model in London, earning $15 per shoot when the average weekly wage was $20. His 6'1" frame, sharp cheekbones, and striking blue eyes landed him work with Carnaby Street boutiques and underground magazines. He modeled psychedelic shirts, velvet jackets, and even women's scarves for experimental campaigns. The money allowed him to buy his first Fender Stratocaster in 1968, the guitar he would later use on Comfortably Numb. Photographer Terry O'Neill confirmed that Gilmour earned more than $500 from modeling, enough to purchase professional amplifiers as well. Although he later admitted that he felt embarrassed during photo sessions, he learned how to use body language to express emotion, a skill that became part of his powerful stage presence. His life changed long before Pink Floyd, when he first met Roger Syd Barrett in 1957 at Cambridgeshire High School for Boys. Both were 11, and they connected immediately over their love of guitars. Barrett taught Gilmour advanced fingerpicking that he had learned from his father, a jazz musician. By 1962, the two were inseparable, spending weekends in Barrett's room experimenting with homemade electronics and tape loops. During those years, Gilmour also saw the first signs of Barrett's illness. Sometimes his friend would sit silently, staring at guitar strings for hours without playing. Their friendship collapsed in 1968, when Gilmour was asked to replace him in Pink Floyd. Barrett felt betrayed, believing that his closest friend had stolen his band. Their last real meeting came in 1975, when Barrett appeared unexpectedly in the studio, overweight by 40 pounds and with a shaved head, asking Gilmour quietly, "Why did you steal my band?" Though Gilmour rejected the academic path of his parents, he was far from ordinary in school. In 1965, Cambridge University admissions officers were astonished by his performance in modern languages. He scored 95% in French exams and spoke fluent Spanish and Italian during interviews. Professors expected him to thrive, but instead of taking part in academic discussions, he filled notebook margins with song lyrics and chords. His French professor, Dr. Margaret Williams, recalled that he could translate complex poetry with ease, yet preferred to practice guitar during tutorials. He memorized entire collections of French verse, not for essays, but to use the rhythms for musical phrasing. This ability later influenced Pink Floyd's sound, as he used the patterns of different languages to shape the emotion in his guitar solos, making them feel almost like spoken words. At 16 in 1962, he formed a band called Joker's Wild. They auditioned for EMI Records, where talent scout Dick Rowe, the same man who had once rejected the Beatles, dismissed them as amateur noise and advised Gilmour to find a real job. The rejection cut so deep that he stopped playing guitar for 3 months and sold his amplifier to pay rent. Bandmates remembered him crying after the audition, convinced his dream was over. In 1965, he joined a blues rock group called Bullet, earning $2 per night playing Cambridge pubs. Their first gig at the Red Lion ended in chaos when drunk customers threw bottles, forcing the band to escape through a back window. Gilmour later said the experience taught him how brutal the music world could be. Determined never to face that humiliation again, he began practicing up to 12 hours a day. Everything shifted in December 1967, when Pink Floyd, struggling with Syd Barrett's declining mental state, invited Gilmour to join as a 5th member. The idea was not to replace Barrett, but to support him on stage, as his erratic behavior was making live shows impossible. Gilmour, only 21, suddenly found himself standing next to a childhood friend whose mind was slipping away. By then, Barrett was often unable to perform, sometimes staring blankly at his guitar during entire concerts. One of the most haunting moments for Gilmour came during the recording of See Emily Play in 1967. Barrett had invited him to the studio, but when Gilmour arrived, his friend looked at him with no recognition at all. Later, Gilmour said, "That was when he changed," marking that exact day as the moment Barrett's mind truly broke. Though the song went on to become Pink Floyd's first top 10 hit in June 1967. Those close to Barrett knew it was also the beginning of his complete breakdown. For a brief time, both Barrett and Gilmour performed together, but the arrangement collapsed after just 5 shows. Barrett would wander aimlessly around the stage, sometimes joining in, sometimes not. The plan of keeping him as a behind-the-scenes songwriter proved impossible as his condition worsened. Gilmour later admitted that he and the others carried deep guilt for years, knowing they had replaced their friend, but also believing they had no other choice. The final turning point came on January 26, 1968, when the band was driving to Southampton University for a show. Someone asked casually, "Shall we pick Syd up?" And another replied, "Let's not bother." That small exchange marked the end of Barrett's time in Pink Floyd, though the band did not announce his departure until April 6, 1968. Drummer Nick Mason later said that Gilmour had been the difference between light and dark for the group's survival. From that point forward, Gilmour carried a heavy burden. He was not only expected to play Barrett's guitar parts, but also to sing his songs, something none of the others wanted to do. He later admitted the weight of performing the work of the very friend he had replaced left him with lasting guilt. At the same time, his arrival saved Pink Floyd, allowing the band to evolve into the progressive rock powerhouse it became. In 1973, David Gilmour was just 26 years old when he discovered a 16-year-old girl named Kate Bush. A family friend had passed him a demo tape, and the moment he heard her voice, he knew there was something extraordinary about her. He personally funded her career development for the next 3 years, paying for around 50 professional demo recordings before convincing EMI to give her a chance. At first, the record label executives were doubtful. One even admitted they thought Gilmour had wasted 2 years and sold them a dud. Bush herself was absolutely terrified the first time she met the Pink Floyd guitarist. But Gilmour stood by her. He went on to produce 2 songs on her debut album, The Kick Inside, including The Man with the Child in His Eyes. All of this happened while Pink Floyd was in the middle of recording Wish You Were Here, showing how Gilmour's ability to spot revolutionary talent never slowed, even during his own creative peak. Kate Bush would later become one of the most influential artists Britain ever produced, proving that Gilmour's instinct had been right all along. 3 years earlier, at the 1970 Isle of Wight festival, Gilmour found himself playing an unexpected role in one of music's most legendary performances. He had gone as a regular fan, camping in a tent like everyone else. But backstage, chaos broke out as Jimi Hendrix was about to perform. The sound engineers, including Pink Floyd's roadie Peter Watts and Charlie Watkins of WEM, panicked over how to handle Hendrix's complicated sound system. In desperation, they called for help, and Gilmour stepped in to run the mixing desk from the side of the stage. He ended up helping deliver Hendrix's epic 18-song set, which included Purple Haze, Foxy Lady, and covers like the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and Bob Dylan's All Along the Watchtower. Gilmour had only met Hendrix once before and didn't know him personally, but that night he proved his technical brilliance went far beyond guitar playing. His quiet intervention made sure Hendrix's historic performance reached the crowd exactly as it should have. But while Gilmour's gifts lifted others, Pink Floyd itself was starting to unravel. The recording of The Dark Side of the Moon stretched across 60 exhausting days at Abbey Road Studios between May 1972 and February 1973. Tensions flared early. Roger Waters wanted a dry, minimalist sound, while Gilmour insisted on the rich, reverberant style that had become his signature. Nick Mason later said, "These were the first signs of serious fractures in the group." Although Gilmour's vision eventually won, Waters felt his authority was under attack. Their perfectionism drove them to use advanced 16-track Studer A80 recorders, often requiring second-generation copies just to make enough space. Waters grew increasingly controlling, even questioning staff about madness, violence, and death for the album's spoken word elements. When the record became one of the best-selling albums in history, Waters admitted he faced a crisis of belief. As a socialist, he had to choose between his ideals and the money, and he chose the money. It was the beginning of a rift that would eventually split the band apart. 2 years later, in 1975, Pink Floyd began recording Wish You Were Here, a tribute to their former bandmate Syd Barrett. The emotional weight was crushing. The heart of the album, Shine On You Crazy Diamond, grew from just 4 notes Gilmour developed into a 9-part epic. But the most haunting moment came when Barrett himself suddenly appeared at Abbey Road. Overweight and unrecognizable, he asked if he could contribute to the tribute written for him. Waters later described the moment as absolutely heartbreaking, while Gilmour admitted he never performed the song without remembering Syd. The recording itself mirrored their crumbling unity. What had once been collaborative now leaned heavily toward Waters, leaving Gilmour increasingly sidelined. When Waters first played the finished album for his wife, she burst into tears. The tribute to their lost friend had become a warning of the creative collapse waiting just ahead. By 1977, the album Animals made the fracture undeniable. Recorded at their Britannia Row studio between April 1976 and early 1977, it marked Roger Waters' complete dominance. He wrote every track except Dogs, which was co-written with Gilmour. For the first time, Richard Wright received no composer credits at all, while Nick Mason's input was minimal. Gilmour, distracted by the birth of his first child, contributed little beyond his co-writing role. The band's earlier songs, Raving and Drooling and You've Got to Be Crazy, were reshaped by Waters into Sheep and Dogs to fit his vision. When Waters and Mason accidentally erased one of Gilmour's guitar solos, session musician Snowy White was brought in to replace it, though his work was omitted from the vinyl release. It was a symbolic moment, showing how little Gilmour's role now mattered in Waters' eyes. The music was more aggressive, more political, and far more reflective of Waters' personal vision than the collaborative Pink Floyd that had once existed. Ironically, these years also brought immense financial success. Between 1974 and 1977, The Dark Side of the Moon alone sold over 45 million copies and stayed on the Billboard charts for more than 14 years. The band left Capitol Records for Columbia and received a $1 million advance, equal to about $6.4 million in 2024. Waters and Wright bought large country houses, and Mason indulged his love for collecting expensive cars. By 1976, Pink Floyd's finances were being handled by the Norton Warburg Group, who acted as both advisors and collecting agents. But the wealth couldn't hide the growing alienation inside the band. While millions of fans connected deeply with songs about disconnection and isolation, the musicians themselves were drifting apart. Their tours brought in massive revenues, yet the money became another source of tension, especially when financial problems later in the decade forced them to keep working together despite their broken relationships. By the time of The Wall in 1979, the warning signs had turned into open war. Roger Waters arrived with a 90-minute demo and expected the band to simply execute it. David Gilmour later admitted that Waters was in complete control. It was his concept, his lyrics, his vision, and the others were reduced to carrying out his orders. Producer Bob Ezrin pushed for Gilmour's songs Comfortably Numb and Run Like Hell to be included. But Waters only allowed it under pressure. The studio atmosphere turned toxic. Richard Wright was fighting depression, a failing marriage, and a cocaine habit, making him an easy target for Waters' relentless criticism. Gilmour said Waters made Rick feel worthless, questioning his every move until his confidence collapsed. Wright was eventually forced to leave, though he stayed on as a paid musician for the live shows. The studio itself became a battlefield. Waters rejected ideas without explanation, demanded endless revisions, and created an atmosphere of fear. The band members no longer worked together, instead recording separately like strangers. Even trivial details caused explosive fights, such as when Gilmour and Waters clashed over which drum track to use on Comfortably Numb. The editing became so complicated that 16-track tape splicing was required to satisfy both egos. When The Wall was finally released, its success gave Waters even more power. The album topped US charts for 15 weeks, reached number 3 in the UK, and sold over 30 million copies. To Waters, this was proof that his authoritarian approach worked. The others felt like employees in a band they had built together. Gilmour himself admitted he had been reduced to little more than a session guitarist. The natural musical connection that had once made Pink Floyd so extraordinary was gone. The money and success couldn't disguise the truth anymore. In the early 1980s, David Gilmour fell into a cocaine addiction that nearly destroyed his life. He later admitted in interviews, "I drank a lot. I used a lot of cocaine, all that stuff," describing those years as a torturous time. The addiction was so severe that it cost him his first marriage and almost ended his career. It wasn't casual use. It was a full addiction that left him drained both physically and emotionally. Cocaine became so routine that during charity dinners he would vanish mid-meal with his manager to use it, breaking promises to the people who cared about him. His use was so heavy that friends and family truly feared he might not survive. Polly Sampson, who would later become his wife, recalled that during this period death seemed like the most likely outcome if he didn't change. The most frightening part was that Gilmour didn't even realize how far he had fallen. Years later he admitted, "I didn't really notice if I was out of control. but I probably was. Between 1980 and 1984, his entire life was slipping away. He said he was struggling with his band, his relationships, and everything else, but drugs had blinded him to the damage he was causing. Cocaine wasn't just part of his weekends, it had become his normal daily routine, leaving him unable to see reality clearly. His bandmates and close friends could only watch as one of the greatest guitarists in rock music seemed to unravel in front of them. The situation only grew worse during the making of Pink Floyd's 1983 album, The Final Cut. Gilmour accused Roger Waters of turning it into his own solo project under the band's name. The tension exploded when Waters tried to recycle songs that had been rejected from The Wall. Gilmour confronted him, demanding, "If these songs weren't good enough for The Wall, why are they good enough now?" The original working title had even been Spare Bricks, a reference to leftovers. Waters controlled the entire project, reducing Gilmour and Nick Mason to little more than session players. For Gilmour, this wasn't just artistic disagreement. It was the feeling that Pink Floyd was being hijacked by one person while still using the band's name to sell records. By 1982 and 1983, his world was collapsing on all sides. He admitted later that he was having a difficult time with my pop group, my relationships, all those sorts of things. Cocaine made everything worse. Recording sessions became increasingly difficult. His playing and focus suffered. His first marriage was falling apart. Even his friendships with Nick Mason and Rick Wright were nearly destroyed. After Waters had forced Wright out of the band during the Wall sessions, only to hire him back as a session musician, the group's chemistry was poisoned. Gilmour described himself as isolated, unable to connect meaningfully with anyone because of the wall his addiction had built around him. Then came a turning point. In the mid-1980s, Polly Sampson entered his life. A single mother, she set firm boundaries from the beginning. She told him that drug use was non-negotiable and that she couldn't stand it. When they started their relationship around 1990, she gave him a clear ultimatum. "If you do that again, I am out of here." One night at a charity dinner in Belgravia, Gilmour disappeared to use cocaine with his manager, breaking the promise he had made to her. When he returned, Sampson confronted him with the question, "Have you just taken cocaine?" He admitted it. She threw champagne in his face and ran down Park Lane, with Gilmour chasing her and promising desperately, "I'll never do it again." That was the last time he ever touched the drug. Both later said they saved each other's lives, she by demanding his sobriety, and he by giving her the love and stability she needed. Just when his personal life began to stabilize, his professional life faced another war. In December 1985, Roger Waters left Pink Floyd, but he wasn't done with the band. In October 1986, he went to the High Court to try to dissolve Pink Floyd entirely and stop them from using the name. Waters compared a Floyd without him to Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr, making records and going on the road calling themselves the Beatles. He argued the band was a spent force creatively. The stakes were enormous. CBS Records had the rights to another Pink Floyd album, and if it wasn't delivered, huge financial penalties would follow. Waters believed that destroying the band would protect his own legacy, while leaving Gilmour and Mason in financial ruin. At the same time, Waters launched a public campaign to present himself as the sole creative mind behind Pink Floyd. He told the press that continuing without him was an insult to the work that came before. He even suggested he had been forced to resign, just as Syd Barrett once had. He wanted the world to believe that Gilmour and Mason were only sidemen, incapable of carrying the band without him. He even visited their recording studios, with producer Bob Ezrin later hinting that Waters was spying on them. As a shareholder in Pink Floyd Music Ltd., Waters could block financial decisions, leaving Gilmore and Mason constantly under pressure. The legal battles dragged on through 1986 and 1987, draining money and energy from everyone involved. Waters admitted later that if a settlement hadn't been reached, the financial repercussions would have wiped me out completely. The disputes included lawsuits over the partnership itself, commission payments, and record company threats. The fact that the band's partnership had never been formally legalized gave Waters a powerful weapon. Gilmore's team responded by threatening lawsuits of their own. The case became so notorious that Rolling Stone's coverage of the feud in November 1987 became its best-selling issue of the year. The pressure was so intense that recording sessions had to be moved to Los Angeles to avoid constant interruptions from lawyers in London. The emotional cost was immense. Gilmour said later it was crushing to fight in court against someone he had once considered a close partner. Waters continued to dismiss their work, calling their new music a pretty fair forgery. Nick Mason admitted the tension was unbearable, with legal proceedings disrupting even the creative process. Waters, still a shareholder, could attend board meetings, forcing his former friends to face him, even as the bitterness deepened. Finally, on December 23, 1987, a settlement was reached. It was so complex that even top lawyers struggled to word it properly. And in the end, the court accepted a simple typed version by accountant Jerome Walton as the official agreement. Under the terms, Gilmour and Mason gained full rights to continue as Pink Floyd, while Waters retained ownership of the wall concept and the inflatable pig from Animals. The first test of the new Pink Floyd came quickly. Their album, A Momentary Lapse of Reason, was released on September 7, 1987, and shot to number 3 in both the UK and US charts, staying on the UK albums chart for 34 weeks. By January 18, 1988, it was double platinum in the US and later reached quadruple platinum. It outsold Waters' solo album, Radio KAOS, and proved Pink Floyd could thrive without him. The victory continued in 1994 with The Division Bell. Released on March 28, it reached number 1 in more than 10 countries, including both the UK and US. Within months, it was certified double platinum in the US and eventually went triple platinum. It sold more than 3 million copies worldwide and gave Pink Floyd their first Grammy Award when Marooned won Best Rock Instrumental Performance in 1995. For the band, it was more than commercial success. It was validation that their creative spark remained strong. Their tours became legendary. The A Momentary Lapse of Reason tour between 1987 and 1989 lasted nearly 2 years, with around 200 concerts drawing 5.5 million people worldwide. In the US alone, they were the second highest grossing act of 1987 and the highest of 1988, earning nearly $60 million. They performed in places they had never been before, from the Palace of Versailles to Moscow's Olympic Stadium, and even a free show on a barge in Venice's Grand Canal. The Division Bell Tour in 1994 broke records as the highest-grossing rock tour of its time, with massive stages, 53 trucks, and a crew of 161 people. In February 2023, the music world was stunned when Polly Samson launched a furious attack on Roger Waters through Twitter. On February 6th, she wrote that he was anti-Semitic to your rotten core, and went on to call him a Putin apologist, a lying, thieving, hypocritical, tax-avoiding, lip-syncing, misogynistic, sick with envy, megalomaniac. The outburst came just after Waters had given an interview to the German newspaper Berliner Zeitung, where he defended comparing Israel to Nazi Germany and claimed that Israelis were committing genocide. What made the moment even more shocking was David Gilmour's response. He shared Samson's post and added only 3 words: "Every word demonstrably true." It was the first time Gilmour had ever publicly backed such harsh language against his former bandmate. Waters quickly answered, saying he was aware of the incendiary and wildly inaccurate comments, and that he was taking advice as to his position, suggesting he might take legal action. For many fans, this very public exchange marked the final collapse of decades of uneasy silence between the two men. The rift only deepened the following year. In October 2024, during interviews with The Guardian and The Independent, Gilmour, now 78, was asked directly about the possibility of performing with Waters again. His answer was short and absolute. Absolutely not. He explained that he avoided people who openly supported leaders like Vladimir Putin and Nicolás Maduro, calling them genocidal and autocratic. He added that nothing could make him share a stage with someone who thought such treatment of women and the LGBT community was acceptable. The timing was striking, coming soon after reports that Pink Floyd had sold their music rights to Sony for about $400 million. Gilmour made it clear that money was not his reason for speaking out. He said he simply wanted to get out of what he described as the mud bath that it has been for quite a while. His final remark was cutting. He said he would rather play with Rick Wright, the band's keyboardist who had died in 2008, than ever stand beside Waters again. The tension was not only personal, but also digital. In 2020, Waters posted a video on his Twitter account accusing Gilmour of keeping him completely off the official Pink Floyd website and social media platforms. At 81, Waters described it as being erased from the band he had helped found in 1965. He claimed that Gilmour wanted to be seen as the sole face of Pink Floyd. The fight over online presence has roots in the 1987 legal settlement that allowed Waters to keep the rights to The Wall, but gave up all claims to the Pink Floyd name and brand. For Waters, the exclusion felt especially painful. He was the original founder, yet he had no say in how the band was presented to the world. Some fans mocked him, saying he could just pay $11.99 to start his own website. The irony was sharp, since Waters had earned more than $300 million from touring The Wall, yet was locked out of the band's digital identity. By the time Gilmour reached 79, his patience had run out. For decades, he had spoken little about Waters, but in 2024, his interviews took a different tone. He finally opened up about what he called Waters' detrimental influence on the band. He recalled how in 1983, during the making of the final cut, Waters dominated the process to the point where the album became almost entirely his vision. Gilmour also dismissed the later album a momentary lapse of reason, which was created without Waters, calling it a pretty fair forgery. Speaking to Rolling Stone, he explained that selling Pink Floyd's catalog was partly about stepping away from the endless arguments and constant decisions that kept the band's legacy in turmoil.